And you're listening to Paranormal Now on the Inception Radio Network. I'm your host, Alan B. Smith, and I welcome you to join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal pit stops and tantalizing turnoffs. If you're a regular listener to IRN, we have an IRN smartphone app where you can listen live to the live stream from home, on the road, or from that greasy diner somewhere off a dusty road. As you all know, this is a podcast, broadcast weekly on Saturday nights, 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But for those of you who listen to the Inception Radio Network frequently, there are so many other ways for you to listen. You can listen to Live 365, Stitcher Radio, Nobex Radio, TuneIn, iTunes Radio, Streama, Shoutcast, Winamp, WinMedia Player, QuickTime, and IRN Roku channel. And of course, if you're at home and your internet goes down, you can always call in at 401-283-6700 and listen to the live 24-hour stream on the Inception Radio Network. Welcome back, everybody. It has been a while, a brief hiatus from the airwaves, and I thank you for tuning in once again. We have a very interesting topic tonight. I'm very excited. This is actually a topic that I've been wanting to dive into more so as of late, and we've sort of just been brushing up the edge of it, on other shows. And now we get a chance to really dive in deep with author Joseph Selby, and he is the author of The Physics of God, Unifying Quantum Physics, Consciousness, M-Theory, Heaven, Neuroscience, and Transcendence. A little bit about the book itself. Compelling and concise, The Physics of God will make you believe in the unity of science and religion, and eager to experience the personal transcendence that is the promise of both. The Physics of God is reader-friendly, combining humor and well-chosen analogies to make complex subjects, both scientific and spiritual, easy to understand. There's no math, and there's no dogma. Unlike many books in this genre that compare only a few concepts of religion with a few facets of science, The Physics of God is complete. This short book concisely connects all the dots between science and the timeless concerns of religion, miracles, heaven, immortality, consciousness, transcendence, and God. And a little bit about the author, Joseph Selby. Joseph makes the complex and obscure simple and clear. He is a dedicated meditator for over 40 years. He has taught yoga and meditation throughout the U.S. and Europe. He has also been an avid follower of the unfolding new paradigm of science, with groaning bookshelves to show for it. And he is known for creating bridges of understanding between the modern, evidence-based discoveries of science and the ancient experience-based discoveries of the mystics. Selby maintains several blogs, including Intersections, which explores how spirituality connects with culture and science. He has also authored The Yugas, a factual look at India's tradition of cyclical history, and a sci-fi fantasy series, The Protector's Diaries, inspired by the abilities of mystics. Selby is a member of Ananda, a meditation-based community and spiritual movement inspired by Paramahansa Yogananda. He lives with his wife at Ananda Village near Nevada City, California. Welcome to the show, Joseph.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm really excited because I love walking that line between science and spirituality. Science and the paranormal, would be another way to phrase that. And I think most people, being spiritual and believers in science, have, if nothing else, a passing curiosity, but a curiosity nonetheless about what science could reveal about their religion or their spirituality. So my hope is that maybe you can enlighten us a little bit. Obviously, myself and the many listeners, that are into this program and other programs like it, we are scouring the internet. We're waiting for the next article to get our attention about quantum physics. And I think one of the minds that had really set the momentum forward was The Field, and I'm sure you've read The Field by Lynn McTaggart, and also the movie's slipping my name now, Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm sure you'll know the documentary I'm speaking of. Anyway, the point is The point is, we are seeking, and so what do you have to share with us that can help us feel a little bit more satisfied about this sort of bringing together of science and spirituality?
Well, what I set out to do in the book was really to show that there is no line between science and spirituality. There is and can only be one reality. There aren't multiple realities. There aren't realities for the skeptics and realities for the ultra-religious. There's just one reality. So I went forward with the conviction, based on my own experience and lots of readings of those books that are making my bookshelves groan, to really establish that science already supports spirituality. It already supports religion. It already supports the paranormal. Why it doesn't appear as if that's the case is because within the world of science, and remember, science is just a method of making discoveries. It's a very methodical, it's a very brilliant process, but it's just a process. And out of that comes discoveries. And then people, like you and I, take those discoveries and they put them together into more complex sets of theories, and they come up with an opinion about how the world works, how the universe works, how the cosmos works. But it's really an opinion, a collection of discoveries that they have latched onto.
So you think this is a problem of perception, or?
Well, there's a very strong group of voices that are scientists who are believers in what's known as scientific materialism. And it's a belief system. They've taken the discoveries that they want to take from science, and they put them all together, and they say, based on this, all of the claims of religion and the paranormal can't be true. Because what we believe all those discoveries are telling us is that everything that is, everything it ever will be, is the result of interactions between matter and energy, and absolutely nothing else. But it's a belief system because they still, based on that assumption, have not shown us how life could have originated. They haven't shown us how consciousness could have originated. They haven't answered some of their own fundamental questions, such as the observer paradox, that it's at the heart of quantum physics. They sort of, when pressed, scientific materialists will say, well, we're getting closer to solving that. We have some great ideas about how life could have originated, perhaps when amino acids came in contact with a crystal, and the inherent lattice organization of the crystal caused the amino acids to line up in its own crystal, and that formed some of the building block molecules of life, and then it went from there. Well, it's a great theory, but they've not found anything to support it. So we have this very strong voice of scientific materialism, not only among scientists, but throughout the world, that is at its best a collection of good, solid facts, but at its fringes, at its margins, is really a belief system that the unanswered questions will eventually be answered, proving scientific materialism to be true. But until they are, it's just a belief. It's just a theory.
Well,
and right
don't you
within,
think...
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, right within science, there are discoveries that have been made that confound scientific materialism. I mentioned one, the intelligent observer paradox. It's like this gaping hole in the middle of science, unexplained gaping hole in the middle of science.
It's like a paranormal hole in the middle of science.
Exactly, exactly. And yet it's been kind of papered over, in a sense, with quantum mechanics. So quantum mechanics was the resulting solution within basically the emerging world of quantum physics to come to some specific outcomes, given that what quantum physics had already discovered is that matter can behave as a wave or it can behave as a particle, that you can only know half of two opposing aspects of any particular atom or molecule. You can know its momentum, you can know its position, but you can't know both at the same time. That's Heisenberg's well-known uncertainty principle. All of these things, combined with the observer paradox, which is really the most weird of all the quantum weirdness, kept them from using classical mathematics to predict the outcome of interactions between molecules and atoms. So they came up with quantum mechanics, which combines classical mathematics with probability theory and the mathematics of probability theory. And between the two of them, they're able to predict the highest likelihood of something happening because they couldn't know things with certainty. And that highest likelihood is extremely exact. Oddly enough, even though quantum mechanics is a blend of probability theory with classical mathematics, it's very, very exact. So they just got to leap over quantum weirdness. They got to say, we don't really need to know why there is the uncertainty principle. We really don't need to know why the intelligent observer paradox is true. We have this math that lets us just jump over it.
So it's kind of like just putting it on the back burner and saying, well, it's not so relevant, but it is very fundamental. So I would think that it is very relevant. But to see things from their side, I think it is kind of a fair argument to say, well, you know what, we don't know that much about the human mind and where the mind itself originates, or we don't really understand the complete structure of the universe, down to its the tiniest particles and physics, laws of physics. But we just need more time. We just need more time.
And that's their argument. That's their argument. And many,
but don't you think
people
that's
are convinced.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair argument to some degree, because like many other sciences, science is sort of malleable because, like you said, like you can learn one aspect of it, and you're right, you have this collection of facts, and those facts make sense. But in a broader sense, you start to realize, oh, there are other factors that we can bring into this, and now we're better at treating this disease, or now we're better at creating metamaterials or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And what the scientific materialists, I don't want to say science, I want to be very careful. People who have adopted scientific materialism as their point of view are pretty much forced to just kind of up to the margins any discoveries that don't fit scientific materialism. And so they were the ones who came up with the term paranormal so that they could easily and convincingly just kind of keep throwing things in that basket of paranormal with the kind of, wink, wink, nudge, nudge that anybody who addresses these kind of things or who are interested in these kind of things must be a little off. So they've managed to characterize a whole slate of non-conforming discoveries, non-conforming to scientific materialism, by just shoving them to the side and kind of illegitimizing them. But they're not going away. There's more and more and more evidence all the time for things like mental telepathy, for telekinesis, for the ability of the mind to affect the body. There's very solidly collected evidence that shows people who have, for example, this is one of my favorite bits of evidence, people who suffer from multiple personality disorder, who have numerous personalities who, come forward and then recede, and another personality comes forward. Fascinating research has been done into the thousands of cases in clinical situations with scientific measuring devices available to the researchers. And they found that not only do people have different personalities, but each personality brings with it instantaneous physiological changes. So one personality would be allergic to bees, perhaps get stung. Another personality comes in, and that reaction goes away immediately.
Huh.
Some personalities have moles and scars that other personalities don't have.
Okay.
Some personalities, there's one poor woman, it's not a enviable condition to be in, multiple personalities. It's usually the result of some extreme trauma. But one poor woman had over 10 personalities, and she carried 10 different pairs of glasses in her purse.
Wow.
Because each personality has a different need, different prescription for them to be able to see. And it's not affected if you measure them. There was another personality that went through 10 changes within an hour, and an ophthalmologist measured each personality across things like visual acuity, tension within the eyeball, curvature of the eyeball, color of the iris. And all 10 personalities had distinctly different sets of readings.
Wait, you said color of the iris?
One of them has a different color iris from the others.
How does that happen?
Well, that is the $64 question, and it doesn't get answered by scientific materialism.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it could if well, I see what you're saying, but I'm wondering if our minds are the impetus for our evolution. I was just reading this article, and I'll just quote you really quick here from it. When we talk about human evolution, we usually talk about how we evolved into humans, how we lost body hair, gained brain mass, started to walk on 2 feet, and short things that happened millions of years ago. But evolution did not stop when the first humans emerged. A new study of 2 massive genetic databases, one in the United Kingdom and one in California, suggests genetic mutations that shorten lifespans have been weeded out since and are possibly still in the process of being weeded out today. And I wonder, like you said, they're looking for the genetic coding for this, but maybe it is our minds that are, hand in hand with our bodies as part of the evolution itself, that our minds are pushing. Because if our minds can create a reaction or a non-reaction to a bee sting or some sort of outside stimuli, then our minds may also be able to force our bodies to adapt.
And I agree with that. I mean, I think it's true, but it begs the question, how does our mind do that? So every biochemical model for how the body works requires some time for those effects to cascade through the body. There's ample evidence that the placebo effect starts with the mind, but then through the mind releasing neuropeptides or affecting the endocrine system or another cascade of effects, the body gradually changes to the expectation of the mind. Mm-hmm. So you can argue, if you just look at the placebo effect, that the mind is the trigger for biochemical effects. But when it happens instantaneously, as it does with the multiple personality sufferers, and some of the effects indicate the presence of different DNA, such as eye color, there's really no explanation for the mind-body response that is the currently understood, mm-hmm. that can explain that. It's too fast. It's
in scientific materialism, I understand.
Okay. Correct. Now, I think that what this indicates is where you were going, is that our minds are tremendously powerful instruments and that we're still coming to understand them. And one of the things I should toss in here at this point, one of the things that I do in my book is I give equal credibility to how the saints and sages, the mystics and the masters of the world, describe their experiences, mm-hmm. to blend them with how scientific discoveries indicate how our reality is shaped. And so I'm not able to tell you that science supports every last detail of the paranormal to the extent that science normally expects to do things. But I can tell you that there is a deep congruence between the way reality is described by those who have had transcendent experiences, mm-hmm. and the way reality is described by some scientists, not all scientists, because many scientists are scientific materialists, but not all. 51% of scientists are not scientific materialists. They believe in God, they believe in a higher power.
Wait, I'm sorry, what?
In a higher consciousness.
What percentage was that?
51%.
That's pretty big. Yeah.
That's pretty big. That's according to a Pew study done in 2009.
Which, you know what? It's very interesting because some of the more prominent, outspoken scientists would have you believe otherwise.
It's a vocal minority, and it's also a vocal minority that controls most of the journals, mm-hmm. that our articles are submitted to. And it's very, very difficult to get any article, any study published in one of the most prestigious journals that doesn't follow the exact script of scientific materialism. They really have a lock on that aspect of scientific materialism, of what most people think is science, where, in fact, they are a minority.
Yeah, I know I've heard, I won't drop any names here, but scientists that we see on TV often. I've heard that they have referred to other scientists being religious, but they do make it sound like the majority of scientists are not, and they haven't made that claim, but in their wording they do. And that worries me, because for those who are more religious in their dogma than scientific, can perceive that, and they can perceive that as an affront to their belief system. And I'm glad people should be, if they're an atheist, be loud and proud about it. I always joke around, but I call myself a part-time atheist. That's because I swing back and forth in my mind. But if you really, I feel like if you want to bridge that gap, the way you communicate is paramount. And I feel like sometimes they're dropping the ball on that.
Well, and I think many, the scientists that you see Neil deGrasse Tyson is everywhere.
True.
Is probably a good example. He's very personable. He's very knowledgeable. Clearly a scientist to his core. But I don't think he would have made it to the prominence that he has if he didn't believe in scientific materialism.
Mm-hmm.
And that, again, those scientists who don't believe in scientific materialism, like Penrose is a good example, he gets marginalized. He's a brilliant scientist. He's got very cogent arguments for the various things he's presented, but he gets pushed to the margin because he doesn't hew the line. So,
well,
go ahead.
Well, I think that actually comes from a place of fear, because I think that they're afraid that if they allow that voice to be stronger, that we're going to become a retro society and, start to throw science aside. And I think part of that is because, this whole debate of, or not so much of a debate really, but the debate of climate change. And then there's the climate change deniers that humans have anything to do with it. So people can take different sides of that story. But I think scientists see that and they go, my goodness, this is really scary that people aren't, don't trust that 99% or 98%, whatever it is, of scientists, may be right. And so I think they're afraid that there's going to be this sort of rollback of, religious dogma, superseding rationality, which can be extremely dangerous to any society. So I can understand if that's the fear, that place that they're coming from.
Right, and they have a view of people who do embrace religions or the paranormal as being not strong-minded enough to have really understood what they're believing and why it's fundamentally in error. Mm-hmm. But I've also found, and everything you say is true. I mean, I think it's strongly fear-driven. We saw that in particular about 10 years ago when there was a real push to question some of the theory of evolution and the mechanisms of evolution. Mm-hmm. And there was a tremendous outpouring of, strong thoughts to the point of anger that people didn't recognize evolution as absolutely true. So I think you're right. I mean, they're defending their faith with the same kind of ardor that religion can get defended.
Okay, well, let's, Joseph, I'm sorry, hold that thought right there. We'll come back after this quick break. I'm speaking with Joseph Selby, author of The Physics of God on the Inception Radio Network. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now. We will be right back.
Hello, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception Radio shows on the go. Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. I'm your host, Alan B. Smith, on the Inception Radio Network. And tonight's guest is Joseph Selby, the author of Physics of God. Taking us out of the break was Mea Culpa by Enigma. I just can't get enough Enigma. The decades go by and I still listen to Enigma. Joseph, are you a fan of Enigma?
I can't say that I am.
What, you were going to tell a story or make a point before we went to break.
Oh, I think I was just trying to say that while reputable scientists are understandably concerned about attacks on science, their fear is based, as you say, that science will be thrown out somehow if any part of their structure of scientific discovery that in their minds proves scientific materialism, that if any part of it falls, then the whole thing will come to bits, and everyone will have their own opinion about what's true, etc. And when they talk about religion, they tend to see religion as this archaic set of superstitions that never had any underlying truth to it all along, and that it was the source of miscommunication, of strife that led to wars and horrors. So they, as you said, they see if they don't stand strong, that mankind is going to slip back into this Middle Ages kind of mentality.
So they see it as a noble cause, or
of course, yeah. I think they're all very noble. I have great respect for scientists of all stripes. I think that they have very disciplined minds. They're very clever. They just tease out little bits of discovery by just thinking, okay, if I can test this tiny thing, then I can move us forward an inch. And they take months to figure out how to test that one tiny thing. And they come up with whole new devices and ways of doing things. I think it's fascinating. But a lot of their concerns about, the crazies on the paranormal left taking over science, or slipping back into a mindless religion, I think are not real. And I think that a lot of what I notice with particularly the debunkers like Dawkins and Stenger, who believe the best defense is a good offense, who attack religion, they attack it really amateurishly. And it basically because they don't understand religion. They pick the surface. They pick the rituals. They pick the teaching stories like Noah's Ark. And they say, well, obviously Noah's Ark is impossible because you could never get two of every species onto a single ship. Or what about bacteria that don't have male and female? How do you get them? So they apply a very rational argument for many of the teaching stories of religion, and they say, therefore, there can't be anything to this. And what they miss, because they don't study it, I mean, I've studied science far more than most of these debunkers have ever studied religion. But because they don't study it, they put together these straw man arguments. Mm-hmm. So I heard Neil deGrasse Tyson, whom I enjoy, by the way, and I watch a lot of the programs that he produces. But he was asked in a Q&A session on a program whether he believed in God. And he said, well, I've given it a lot of thought, and I believe that if God existed and that God had created all of the cosmos, that there would be no strife, there would be no suffering, there would be no inequality, there would be no disease. And because all of those things exist, obviously God doesn't exist. So it sounds really good, mm-hmm. But if you have much of a grasp of religion, you will see that there's not a single religion that claims what he's saying is true. That there's no religion that says God intended to make the world perfect. That there are reasons why the world we live in, even as created by God, have all these elements of strife and disease and inequality. But because he said it so, with such certainty, it actually made me laugh, because I thought, okay, here's a man who doesn't believe in God, but he's really sure what God would do if God existed.
Right. Right. It's easy to topple over, easy to
win straw man argument.
Well, I mean, religions have been saying that for the longest time. You know, that we can't understand the omnipresent mind of God, which, you know, to some extent could sound just like an excuse for we don't understand how the universe came to be.
But where I would beg to differ, and where I really go with the book, is that I don't rely on the testimony of the theologians who make or tend to be the ones who come up with these phrases like mysterious are the ways of God. I go to the people who have actually had direct transcendent experience, which I refer to as the saints and sages. These are the masters who have had an experience that is so profound and so deep of a reality that underpins the subtle reality that underpins all of what we see through our senses. And if you study enough of them, if you read the life stories and read the teachings of these saints and sages from as far back as you want to go, you'll find that there is very soon a compelling consistency to how they describe God. And it's not the theological dogma of any one religion. You can begin to appreciate how the dogmas of many religions formed out of sort of an ignorant interpretation of what the original saints and sages said. But what they actually say is that there is an infinite consciousness that is intelligent, that is knowing, and that we as individuals are part of that infinite consciousness, but we don't yet know it, and that we have all the powers of the divine within each one of us, but we don't know how to use them. We see them being used in situations like I described with the multiple personality sufferers, where they use their God-given but unseen powers to transform their bodies instantaneously. They just don't know they're doing it. We're using those powers all the time. This is what the saints and sages tell us. They just say, you are that. The kingdom of heaven is within. You are that, is what the Hindus say. That it's there and it's constantly functioning. We're just not aware of it. We're constantly creating the bodies we have. We're continuously creating the reality around us with this infinite intelligent consciousness of which we are a part. We're just unaware of it. We tend to only be aware of this outer manifestation of a chain of manifestations that is our physical body. If you stick with that testimony, if you don't try to reconcile all the different dogmas of all the different religions around the world, but if you just knit together the testimony of the saints and sages, and those mystics and masters who've realized these things for themselves, what they describe is easily supported by science. There's no stretch. They describe a cosmos much like string theory describes it, or aspects of quantum physics describes it, or quantum physicists like David Bohm describe it. And if you read the quotations of the really high-minded scientists like Einstein, like Heisenberg, like Bohr, like Bohm, like hundreds of others, the way they describe reality through the lens of what they have learned is it's very subtle. Heisenberg came up with the term potentia with a capital P to describe this underlying realm of reality out of which reality comes into existence when observed by an intelligent observer. Particularly the quantum physicists become de facto mystics when they talk about what's really happening.
Right. See, now, I mean, I would lean more towards these descriptions, but, I was raised Catholic, and, it was made to sound, and Catholic saints and mystics of days gone by, spoke a little bit differently than God, but, the way we were raised was sort of, God was of a singular mind, that made choices and decisions that affected our lives directly. But that was always difficult for me to reconcile, because, a parent, many parents do know how to raise a child without having to beat them, and raise them to be good people. So, does pain have to be part of the growing process to be a better person? I mean, if you just created something by choice, would you have created something where you knew people would have to feel pain and suffer? I think that's what makes it a challenge. But if we lean more towards if perhaps not yours, but what you just described as being a intelligent sort of, omnipresent mind that is just the substrate or a part of the universe, then that I can accept more, and that is what I tend to lean towards more in my own personal beliefs, because then it says to me that mind is also evolving with us in a sense. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Mm-hmm. A lot of what you're saying is, I think, the fundamentals of what you could call, the perennial philosophy, the universal religion, the eternal religion, that you begin to pick up on when you read extensively the lives of people from Teresa of Avila to Indian mystics, that you begin to see, they're using a different language in a different time that has a different culture, but their experience is the same. And what they say in answer to that fundamental question you just asked of, why did God create the universe as he did, if there's going to be pain and suffering in it, is that each one of us is self-willed, and that each one of us can make decisions and experience consequences. Now, most religions don't believe in reincarnation, or some religions don't believe in reincarnation, I should say. Actually, there are more religions, more people in more religions that believe in reincarnation than not. But still, even the ones that don't, you can find hints of them referring to this law. Jesus said when the soldier chopped off the ear of someone, and a disciple was going to pick up the sword and run him through.
Was it Peter?
I forget who it was, but he basically said, those who live by the sword die by the sword. So how can that be if you don't have more than one lifetime for that to come true? There's lots of hints that the incarnation after incarnation that we have, we're in school, we're learning. And so the pain and suffering is of our own making. And that coming back to higher awareness is not a process of undoing all our suffering. It's a process of stopping doing those things that make us suffer, and to live more in harmony with that higher consciousness that is God. And in so doing, we expand, we become self-realized. All the things that we think of as miracles or paranormal powers become normal for us because we've rediscovered, we've made our way back. We've learned all the lessons we need to learn to come back to that knowing.
Well, I think that we're always making analogies and metaphors in reference to computers in our brain. And now you have quantum computers, and you can start making analogies between quantum physics and how that functions like a computer, like a very complex quantum computer, the nature of our reality. So we have all these ways of thinking of how things function. A plus this equals that, and so it no matter how you go about it, I think the only way from my mind to accept that some sort of being created things, as it were, with all the suffering, is to admit that my human mind simply has not the imagination nor the ability to comprehend what the purpose or intention of that is. And again, I feel like, yes, on the one hand, it's a cop-out, but on the other hand, it's the only other explanation I can think of. So when someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson says, these are my reasons why, it's like, well, but you're postulating a being that is supposed to be, this super intelligent that you can't comprehend. So if you can't comprehend it, then how can you postulate on it? So again, I feel like it's something of a dead end, and like you had mentioned before, living in accepting the mystery of the mind of God, or something along those lines. While I don't believe in a God in that sense, I do believe that embracing the mystery is part of the joy of living.
And I would agree. I think the other distinction I would make that I think supports what you're saying is that it's not with our rational mind that we can really convince ourselves of the existence or purpose of God. It's through experience, and maybe that's what you're alluding to with the mystery of God. But I've meditated for over 40 years now, and I have absolutely no doubt of the existence of God. Not because it has made me super smart, or because I now have all these great arguments that I've collected, or even because I was convinced by all these books I've read by saints and sages. I have no doubt that God exists because in meditation, I can feel things that have expanded me, have filled me with joy, with love, with bliss, with peace, have inspired me, have brought me to great creative leaps in my own understanding that is incomparable to anything that I've ever achieved just by reasoning my way forward. Mm-hmm. And this is what's true of all the saints and sages, is that they don't have, when you read them, they're not describing in rational theological detail. They're describing from the heart what their experience was and how they understood what God was trying to teach them, or what the infinite intelligence or the infinite consciousness. A lot of people get hung up with the word God, but it is that infinite knowing consciousness that is everywhere, that interpenetrates all of reality and is the causative force of all of creation. Call it whatever you like. But these mystics and masters and near-death experiencers who go into heavenly experiences, the main thing they describe is that it's just utterly wonderful. I was moved to tears. I read a digest of story after story taken from books and articles written by near-death experiencers. Mm-hmm. And they all just will say things like, it's impossible to describe with words. I was so moved, I can't convey it. I felt like I was expanding into an infinite reach that was way beyond anything I had ever experienced. I was utterly taken up in love. I felt my every atom was composed of joy. I mean, they just go on and on. And that's the real experience of God, is that joy, is that love, is that bliss.
Well, it's an interesting thing, because I've come, to at this point in my life, I've come to find that I am most at peace when I am feeling most grateful. And from an evolutionary standpoint, it seems an odd way for the brain to be satisfied. It seems what reason does the mind have to evolve, or the body and brain evolve to the point where you have to feel grateful that's a quintessential part of being happy? Because, if we are just a super smart biological species, then we should be happy when we have, all the essentials, right? But we don't need the sense of gratitude itself. Why don't we just get up in the morning, do our thing, do what we have to do, and go to bed? Why is it when we have a new discovery, it's like, oh, this is so fantastic, and you're grateful for it? Sometimes you wake up and you think, wow, I love this job, if you're lucky to have a job like that, mm-hmm. and you're grateful. I feel like that's when you're not just getting like a jolt of serotonin rush or whatever hormone. It's a much more grounded sense of joy. At least this is what I found, as I'm getting older. And I don't know, it just seems an odd way that biology would program our brain to have that sort of reward through such an emotion.
Right. Yeah, the evolutionary theory as it stands really can't account for altruism except as a very kind of indirect survival mechanism. Mm-hmm. But people who are in the serving professions, the nurses, the teachers, the doctors, doctors make a lot of money, but many people in the serving professions don't, firemen, they feel a deep sense of satisfaction in helping other people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's hard to justify through some evolutionary theory that's hardwired into your being, and that you get a serotonin response when you help someone. But it's at the heart of the spiritual experience, is that when you consider realities beyond your own small self, you expand. And when you expand, you feel better. The more you expand, the better you feel. The more you serve, the better you feel. The more you take in the needs of others or the opinions of others, the better you feel. Because you're moving away from this very, very narrow identification that we tend to have with just our needs, with our situation. Mm-hmm. And that's just the glimmer of the expansion and love and joy that you can feel. In a sense, meditation which I started talking about, is a scientific, methodical way to expand beyond the boundaries of your little mind and little body. And when you do that, you also sort of come back to your experience with a natural desire to help others, to serve others, to feel grateful, to feel yourself benefited just by being and not by having or doing.
Right. And I want to preface that before doing this interview, I have not been able to read the book because this was sort of a semi-last minute get-together. But I still want to ask you a question, whether it's in the book or not. I'm not sure. But when we come back from this next break, I want to ask you about love and, sort of dovetail off of what we've been speaking about here. Where does love, the sensation of love itself, where does that play as a factor into our very existence in the grand scheme of things? So not a small question. So
it's a great question.
We'll be right back after this quick break. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now. And my guest is Joseph Selby, author of The Physics of God. Stay tuned. We shall be right back. Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your host on the Inception Radio Network. And taking us out of the break was Your Love Keeps Lifting Me Higher and Higher. Jackie Wilson, one of the greatest songs of the 60s and maybe of all time. Anyway, actually, when that phrasing reminded me of a politician. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. But welcome back to Paranormal Now, and our guest tonight is Joseph Selby, author of The Physics of God, and this has really been a compelling conversation. I'm really enjoying it. So, Joseph, I had asked you before we took the break if you could expand and expound and explain to us what you think love is and how it fits into the grand scheme of things.
It's a great question. It actually gives me a chance to kind of segue a bit away from just talking about religion in its own context, mm-hmm. and bring the discussion back to where we began, which is this unity of the underlying discoveries of science and the underlying tenets of religion, or the testimony of the saints and sages. And I'll answer your question in a way that allows me to kind of bring in some of those fundamental scientific discoveries. So the saints and sages would say, we don't feel love in our physical bodies. They would say that we feel love in our subtle body, in our energy body, or astral body, etheric body, spirit body. It's a term that you'll find everywhere in mystical teachings. And that in fact, most of what we think of as ourselves, our vitality, our life force, our likes and dislikes, our will, our creative visualization, and our feelings, according to the saints and sages, they're seated in the subtle body. And although we experience physiological results of those feelings, the heart of those feelings is in the subtle energy. So how then could science support the notion that we have this subtler reality that is interpenetrating with our physical body? And I got a lot of the support for many of the things I find in the book, or just explained in the book, from string theory, and particularly M theory. So this is going to be a little bit of a digression to come back to where we feel love. But string theory started off trying to explain why there is so much energy in the cosmos compared in quantum physics compared to the theories of relativity. The theories of relativity can add up a certain amount of, background radiation, the cosmological constant, different measurements of energy that has to be present sort of in the fabric of the universe in order to explain why the universe behaves the way it does. So quantum physics, which typically starts with the tiny and then tries to expand to the macro, if they use their calculations that describe the tiny, the entire universe should have vastly more energy in it than has ever been able to be detected. And if it did have that much energy in it, it's like a factor of 122, that much bigger than the amount of energy predicted by relativity. And if it were present in the physical universe would behave far differently than it does. So quantum physicists ask themselves, where is this energy? We believe it's got to be there, otherwise atoms wouldn't behave the way they do. That matter itself would not be able to exist were it not for this vast field of energy. And in fact, the famous Higgs boson and the triumphant locating of where it is in terms of its place in the whole spectrum of subatomic particles was really proof of the Higgs field. And the Higgs field is a much more important thing. The Higgs boson by itself is interesting, but it's the fact that it confirmed the existence of a universal field of energy that does not diminish with distance. It's not a magnetic field that quickly tails off in strength the farther it is away from the magnet. It's equally potent everywhere in the universe. So if this exists, why does the universe not just kind of explode into the distance? Because there would be so much energy in it that all the stars would be rocketing away from us. And in fact, the universe would never have formed at all as it has if that energy were present physically.
Sure.
So the string theorists say, well, this energy has to exist, but maybe it exists in other dimensions that are unmeasurable from our three physical dimensions, but that they definitely exist. And there are two sort of theories, one of which they started with and kind of abandoned after a while, was that these dimensions are kind of wrapped into themselves. So they sort of curl into these tiny subspaces, and that all this extra energy that exists in the universe is actually in these tiny spaces. And then another theory came along was that, well, it would actually be easier to explain if these weren't tiny, but they were enormous, but they were only two-dimensional. And this is where we get M theory and brain theory from.
So you said, wait, they're both tiny and enormous, or just enormous but two-dimensional?
So the tiny theory, there are still adherents to the tiny dimensions theory, but it became more workable. It answered more questions, essentially, to do the giant brains, the giant bulk, which is this pure energy substrate for the entire cosmos.
I see.
And it's out of this bulk, out of this pure energy realm, which I tend to refer to just more easily as the energy verse, that bubble universes are said to spring, and that our universe, as vast as it is, according to M theory, is just a tiny bubble existing, three-dimensional bubble existing in a two-dimensional, almost infinitude of pure energy. So this is what string theory came to, and M theory in particular, to explain where all this energy is. It's there, it's at super high frequencies, much higher than any scientific instrument can detect, and way beyond our ability of our senses to detect, but yet it's ever present, it interpenetrates us.
It's just so funny to hear you say that, and it sounds like you're talking about God. There's so many overlapping contextual descriptions. That the waters seem to be more muddier the harder science tries to explain the universe.
Yes, well, they keep trying, and it's amazing what they have.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Discovered and proposed. Mm-hmm. But I find it even more amazing that if you can't reconcile all scientific theory into one theory. Mm-hmm. There are very different theories based on opinions of different scientists. But there is enough reputable scientists who embrace things like M theory, even though it's largely unproven, because they see how it answers some of these other fundamental questions, like why is there an uncertainty principle, and how can paranormal phenomenon be true? They have to start taking these into account. Well, the other thing that the M theorists did, and a thing that we hear a lot about, is that David Bohm, who is actually probably not considered a string theorist, although many of the things that he espoused and developed mathematics for are subsequently adopted by string theory. Mm-hmm. And one of them is the holographic principle. So Bohm, in his early years, wrestled with the problem of basically how is it possible that matter can be absolutely propertyless until it's observed by an intelligent observer, and then springs into a particular form. And he posited that there must be, like Heisenberg posited, this realm, which he called pre-space. It's non-local in the language of quantum physics. It's two-dimensional. And he called this pre-space where the implicate order existed. And he called this where all forms in the universe, all forms in the energyverse in pre-space were folded into two dimensions. And then when they emerge into the physical universe, they become part of the explicate order, and they unfold into three dimensions. So he developed an entire mathematics called Bohmian mechanics, mm-hmm. based on this notion. And it's still a heavy candidate for being a true mathematics or reality.
So he's theorized, if I have this correct, the two-dimensional construct can turn into a three-dimensional construct?
Exactly.
Huh, okay.
And that led him to the mathematics of holography, which existed in his lifetime. And using the math of holograms, he was able to apply that to his implicate, explicate order. And he came to the conclusion, he was one of the first, maybe not the first, that our entire physical universe is a holographic projection from the two-dimensional energyverse.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So there's a template. There's a folded template, which he referred to as the implicate order, that when drawn in, so to speak, to the three-dimensional world of the physical universe, takes on all those three dimensions. So
it reminds me of, are you familiar with, I think it's Miguel Ruiz, author of The Four Agreements? I think the subtitle was a Toltec Wisdom Guide. Have you heard this?
I definitely have heard of it, and I've read some of it, but I can't say I know it.
Well, it reminds me that, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it's something like a fog. That life is we see it as an illusion, and I think a lot of mystics speak in a similar way. So if we are a projection of a two-dimensional universe, then in a sense everything is an illusion. I don't know, it's really hard to kind of wrap your head around that, because how can I even conceive of a two-dimensional space in the first place? I don't know, how do you feel about
it's
that?
Very hard.
Yeah.
It's very hard to wrap your head around two dimensions, because our very language is couched in three-dimensional terms for the most part.
Yeah.
But an analogy that I have come across that has been used by saints and sages in near-death experiences is that the two-dimensional reality that they go to in transcendent experiences, in near-death experiences, is like images on a movie screen. They give all the appearance of three-dimensionality, but they're not, in fact, three-dimensional. And yet, you can easily get caught up in a movie and feel yourself moving with the characters through space and interacting with a fully fleshed out three-dimensional world, even more so with virtual reality.
Sure.
And yet that's all two-dimensional. So the description they give is that you're in a luminous reality that is spaceless and matterless. It's not three-dimensional. But as one near-death experiencer said, this reality that you experience in these transcendent states and near-death experiences is the clear, bright print from which a grosser, more imperfect print that we know as the physical universe is made. So the hologram, and for anything to have a holographic projection, there has to be a hologram. The hologram is the two-dimensional film that contains all the information, and if you shine light through it, it creates, it's not exactly shining light through it, you have to shine laser light through it in a particular way, but it creates a three-dimensional image as a result of that interaction between the information in the hologram and the light energy. So what the M theorists are saying, what Bohm said, is that this energy verse is the source of the information. It's why we can't tell whether an atom, we can't tell both its position and momentum. We have this uncertainty until it manifests, because the information, the properties that determine that aren't present in the physical world. The information and the properties that determine it are in the energy verse or astral universe.
So is it something like we go to the movie theater the characters that are on the screen, we see the light projecting them, but those characters are unable to even recognize that there is a light projecting them in the first place.
Well, and that's true of movies, but it's only an analogy. The way the masters and mystics describe it is that we also are self-aware in that movie, but when we're on the physical world, in the physical world, in our physical bodies, which are themselves holographic projections, we are more caught up in our own personal holographic projection. We feel it's solid. We feel like we need to take care of it, and that it's going to, give us pleasures of various kinds when we eat and when we sleep, when we have sex, when we do many things. And so we tend to get really attached to taking care of that physical body. But just as the heart of the information that forms the entire physical universe is seated in the energy verse, the information, the feelings, the convictions, the thoughts, the will that animates our physical body is actually present in our energy. So this comes full circle to where you start to ask the question. Our energy bodies are more naturally attuned to the ever-present reality of infinite love, infinite joy, infinite wisdom, infinite peace and calmness. And that this is why heaven, and this is really what I'm describing, is the same way that all the heavens of the religions around the world are described as being pure, higher, freed of limitations, no need to eat, no need to sleep, that you are freed of the burdens of the physical body. That's really how heaven is described, and that's what the near-death experiencers and the masters and mystics describe this higher plane of existence. So
is that higher plane of existence the two-dimensional plane?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And we're in that plane. This is where it really gets hard to even begin to visualize, is that we're in that plane now.
Mm-hmm. We're both and.
We're both and. You can't have a physical body if it weren't interpenetrated by and supported in every instant by your energy body.
So is the...
Which, just
so
to finish, just let me close the loop
there.
That's the same thing that M theorists are saying about the physical universe. If you didn't have the holographic information present in the energy verse, the physical universe would cease to exist. The physical universe is continuously created.
Uh-huh. Now, if they, assuming they can prove that one way or another, doesn't that still leave another great mystery of what the origin is? Does that somehow answer the origin?
Well, it is an answer to the origin. I can't say that it inherently answers that question, but an answer is that God created and continues to create the universe through his intelligence, or its intelligence, or her intelligence, applied to this energy verse, which then projects the physical universe. And so the origin, the substrate of everything, is the infinite consciousness of God. I use God because it's the easiest word to use, but many people use other words. But God is infinite consciousness, and in that infinite consciousness is inherently powerful. It's inherently joyful, loving, peaceful.
Well, okay, that's the question though, is how do we know that that's why that it is inherently loving?
I can only say that's because what the saints and sages testify.
Okay, and you believe that?
Well, my personal experience, nowhere near as lofty as those people who I'm referring to,
mm-hmm.
the masters who I'm referring to. My own experience is that the more I go within, the more I identify with that subtle energy body, which is, in terms of sort of esoteric teachings, that our chakra system. It's our esoteric body. Almost all mystical paths describe this other inner world that you explore through meditation and other techniques. But the more I feel connected to that, and the less I am barraged with sensory information and barraged just with the sensation of being a physical body, the more joyful, the more peaceful, the more loved I feel. And that's why I say, for me, there's just no question, because I've had that experience over and over and over and over again. Not in, vast ways. Maybe it's just a few seconds sometimes. But put it all together, and it's utterly convincing to me. But I think for anyone to really believe it, just like I didn't necessarily believe it, I was open to it, they really need to go experience it. They really need to practice meditation, do these techniques that take you into that subtle self. And then you can say, I get what these masters and mystics are saying. I now understand why they're so thrilled, why they're so moved by their experience.
Well, when one experiences love, that sensation, is it the same biological chemical cause that creates that sensation as when you accomplish something creative and you just get this rush of, I finally did it, I've completed it, or your favorite baseball team wins a game, or you just went through went to the New York Philharmonic and orchestra and had this just uplifting experience, and all these variations of pleasure. Is love through science, is it markedly different in the physiological explanation of that experience than the other reward experiences?
Well, I think that the distinction I would make there is that you feel first in your subtle body. You feel that sense of completion and satisfaction of a creative project well done, or feeling a sense of, wonderful communion with another person, whether it's a friend or a girlfriend or a parent. You feel that, but you feel it first in the physical body, in the subtle body, and then there is a cascade of effects from that feeling that are biochemical, and both of them are real. I think it's important for people to understand that when you say that the universe is an illusion, or your body is an illusion, it doesn't mean it's not there. It just means it isn't what it seems.
All right, well, let's hold it right there, Joseph, and we'll pick this up when we come back from the last short break. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on the Inception Radio Network. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.
Hello, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception radio shows on the go. Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your host on the Inception Radio Network, which I am extraordinarily grateful to have this opportunity that was given to me by the producers Joe Champion, MJ Lucas, and Bob Tarmac, who typically I wait to the end of the program to thank them. But I wanted to thank them now while we're still in the middle of the show here, because these guys work really hard to bring an enormous number of hours of paranormal alternative radio to you, and they deserve the regard for their efforts that they do, and I just can't express how much gratitude I have for them, for not only just for this program, but for trying to get as much information out there that is otherwise not accessible. And it's true, yes, there are a lot of paranormal radio programs that are streaming, a lot of independent podcasts, but this network, as far as internet streaming, is one of the largest, and it's only because they put their blood, sweat, and tears and passion behind it. So again, thank you, Joe, Bob, and MJ. And taking us out of the break was Ray of Light by Madonna. Now, I want to continue this last thought we left off with when I was speaking with Joseph, author of The Physics of God, Joseph Selby. And we were talking about love. So, Joseph, I don't know if you wanted to sort of wrap up your thoughts on the physiological reward system, and anyway, I'll let you take it from there.
Well, thank you for that, and I'll see if I can bring it back to a closure from where we started. So the saints and sages say we have this subtle body, the astral body, the energy body, and that the origin of our finer feelings, our higher feelings, and even negative emotions like anger and hate are in that energetic body. So anytime we tune into one of those feelings, when we experience that feeling, whatever the cause, there is a cascade of physiological results from having that feeling. And this is why holistic health takes into account what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and that the very power of those feelings can make you enormously healthy or can kill you prematurely, because there is that connection. But the feeling starts in your subtle body and then triggers the reaction in your physiological body. So you feel love, as we say, we feel it in the heart. There's no organ in the physical body that matches that.
Well, I mean, I could say through personal experience, and I think everyone would say the same thing. It feels different. There is something unique and special. We differentiate between a crush on another person, infatuation for another person, a physical attraction for another person, and love. Love is this other category that crosses over so many other boundaries. Not just, it's a same or similar feeling between the romantic relationship and the relationship that you have with someone that you don't know. Just you have an altruistic love for that person and their well-being. When you see them suffer, it's a like I think you said earlier, more of like a subtle sensation. It does feel like a deeper well of, and I don't want to say emotion, but more of a sensation, because I'm speaking of that bigger love that you feel, and because of that, you have how many musicians and songwriters and philosophers and religious philosophers, leading their thoughts with love and compassion, and that this is the way, this is how we should be living, this is the way to bring organization and take away chaos, to eliminate it, to bring peace and centeredness. It's always no one is saying hate is the way. No one is saying, right? I mean, no one is saying angst is the way. It's always is love. And it is, in my mind, difficult to explain simply as a biological function. Though I am not ruling that out, of course, because I think there is good science to suggest that, like you were sort of inferring before. But anyway, so we'll move on from the topic of love, because that's a topic that I love. And I'm going to ask you a question, and I'd really like to hear what you have to say. Do you, A, believe in aliens, as in extraterrestrials, or interdimensional visitations? And if so, is there a relationship between humans and those other beings?
An interesting question. I guess I would characterize myself as readily believing that there are aliens, and quite readily believing that aliens could have come to the earth, could still be on the earth. But I guess for me, it doesn't sort of inherently fascinate. I don't think we need aliens to explain past scientific development. I don't think we need aliens to save us. I don't think we need aliens to allow us to live, deep, fulfilling, loving lives. So I hate to sound dismissive, because I'm not really trying to be dismissive, but personally, it's just not that interesting to me, because I think what I'm much more satisfied with is going deeper into the spiritual teachings that have been offered by all the masters and mystics, because I've had so much personal satisfaction with them.
So do you think that the curiosity, and often extremely intense curiosity, the preoccupation and study of extraterrestrial beings, whether they exist or not, is partially because we are seeking answers and seeking some sort of satisfying explanation for why we are here, who we are, and someone like yourself finds that you don't need that. Whether they exist or not is cool, but you are finding a certain amount of satisfaction and a certain amount of answering through your spiritual path.
Correct. And my particular spiritual path that I follow, the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda, has, plenty of room for there to be extraterrestrials. And in fact, as you said, transdimensional beings. Yogananda, in a interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita, mentioned that there were beings that lived on the surfaces of suns that were 10 miles tall. And he referred to the fact that there are vast numbers of other planets in our universe that have intelligent life. So I'm quite at home with it as a concept, and he was quite at home with it as a concept, but he didn't make the other connection that often gets made, which may, as you were alluding, lead people to think they have answers that we need. or figuring them out is an answer we need. He didn't go there. He said, the deeper answers, the bigger answers, the cosmic answers are found in your own inner exploration of your own consciousness. And you don't have to go anywhere or learn anything outside of yourself to be able to do that.
Have you read Ram Dass's Be Here Now?
Oh yeah, it was an early inspiration for me getting into spiritual teachings.
Did you feel like it messed with your head a little bit?
Yes, but like many of my generation, I was messing with my head at the same time.
Right. Well, when I read it, it was like it did something to my mind. Do you know? It felt like my mind was being shifted, in slightly into an alternate world. Not opinion, but a state of mind. And it's an interesting read when you sort of just let go. It is similar, as similar as you can through the reading and imagination, as going on like an acid trip or a psilocybin trip or something like that. I just found it almost magical in that sense, and spellbinding and bounding, literally. And it makes me wonder, did he really go somewhere else and bring a sort of a code back from that other, maybe like we've spoken to of earlier, the source of that two-dimensional substrate reality, and bring back in a quote coded way that we can sort of absorb it?
Well, I think I can't tell you that I know Ram Dass's thinking process, but he brought that out after he had spent time with his spiritual teacher, Neem Karoli Baba. Mm-hmm. And he had begun meditating and spent a lot of time with his teacher before he wrote that book. And I think what he was trying to do, my feeling always has been that he was trying to get Westerners out of their rational mind to understand something that only can be experienced. Mm-hmm. So he had to take you on a little journey that was unlike any journey you'd ever been on before.
And I'd say it worked, for me at least, yeah.
And it worked, yeah. Mm-hmm. I was fascinated by it and moved by it, and it was really an important book for me.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that. What are some of the most important works that you've read, or figures or authors that have sort of guided you down this path to write this book, as it were?
Well, the main book that has guided me is Yogananda's Autobiography of a Yogi. Mm-hmm. It's been out since 1946. It's been read by millions of people. There are something like 10 million copies have been printed since it was first published. It was the first book written in first person by a realized spiritual master. And there are many books that are records of what great spiritual teachers are saying. Mm-hmm. But as just a story of their life and how they experienced God and found God and understand God, it is unique because it's in the Western vernacular. It's not a book where he brings in lots and lots of Eastern concepts that are difficult for us to understand. He explained everything to Westerners, and I think what continues to impress me is how much of a scientific foundation it has. So that's been a huge wellspring for me. I can't tell you any other book that's had more impact on me. I loved books that like the Tao of Physics, the Dancing Woolley Masters. I always had a very strong scientific background. I think before I discovered meditation, which pulled me away from a strictly scientific bent, I would have ended up as a microbiologist or a physicist. I was very much going down that path. But it was books like the Autobiography of a Yogi and Be Here Now and the Tao of Physics that really, moved me away from that. So there's more here. There's a lot more here. Plus, at the time I was in college, many of us were imbibing hallucinogenic substances, and I had a few very profound experiences that I could not explain rationally or with any, at that time, scientific explanation. And that in combination with these books really sent me on, a life journey to figure out, how do I have that experience better and continuously?
Right. Yeah, I think many people have come out the same with the same opinion as yourself, including Ram Dass. And but I do wonder, because we are talking about the merging of science and and spirituality, and in a sense, like Timothy Leary, what he was doing is, and he has kind of a bad rap. I think he was trying to stick to the whole set and setting and being responsible with the use of LSD. And I think originally, especially, he was using it as a scientific tool to expand our consciousness. Do you see a viable future where human beings can use substances or, I don't know, some other technology to help us get in touch with that source?
Well,
responsibly and
I can only really speak to my own experience, and what I have found was that it wasn't consistent. I mean, that may have been in part because the source of supply for me was probably inconsistent. But I did find that not all hallucinogenic experiences were uplifting. Not all of them were satisfying. Some of them were unpleasant.
Yeah.
And it convinced me that while there was a reality there that the psilocybin or whatever I happened to be taking put me in touch with, that reality was separate from the psilocybin, that the drug was just a means to make that connection, but it was always temporary.
Well, and do you think that they are, as dangerous or evil, there's descriptive words that others might use, evil, but like cocaine or heroin or crack cocaine or all these things, are they tend to be lumped in the same category of detrimental effects? Do they deserve that, or
it's a very interesting question, and I personally, I'm very grateful for having had the experience, but I would never recommend it to someone. I had friends who came out of the 60s with not as much as they entered the 60s with, that it really was detrimental to them. There is for an addictive personality, they are as addictive as any other drug because they're so entrancing, they're so energizing, they're so able to take you out of yourself and your thoughts of the day and your worries of the week.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because so many make the argument that it actually is good for fighting addiction, or can be used to counter addiction.
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit like, removing one thorn by using another thorn to do it. I think under proper supervision with someone who really, really knows what they're doing, I think it's probably true. And, carefully controlled doses, the ability to be, brought down from that experience quickly if it starts to go bad. I think.
Yeah, under supervision, all that.
Yeah, I think all that is true. I think they're just easier ways. And the easiest way I know is meditation.
Right. Well, Terence McKenna, which I'm sure you're familiar with, he always made the sort of snide remark argument that it's like, it's great that you can get in touch with God through meditation, but who has time for it? It's like, in this day and age, it seems like, well, you know what? If I can just do this other thing, in a couple of hours or in 5 minutes, I can touch the divine and learn something about myself. And I know for myself, I work on putting that time aside to meditate, and it's usually at the end of the day when I'm tired, and it's harder to convince myself, okay, come on, man, just 10 minutes. That's all you need. Just 10 minutes. Put it aside. You can do it. So I feel like, and this isn't against you. I feel like, if it was so easy, more people would do meditation. So I think the challenge is how to convince people that the time invested in meditation is well worth the rewards that you reap from it.
Yeah. Well, it's like all things, and wrapped up securely in human nature. I mean, I know that eating right is going to make me healthier, but there's a little work involved. Mm-hmm. You and I both know that exercise is going to make us a little healthier, but you have to work at it. Meditation is no different. It's not an easy slide into results. You do have to apply some will and discipline, but I'm completely sold on it because now the benefits that I receive from it just so outweigh the effort that I have to put out, the discipline I have to exert, the time I have to take to do it. So I just hope what people hear when they hear me talk is not that they should meditate, but that, wow, maybe there's something I should experience here, and give it a go if they're not already meditating. It is quite simply the greatest source of happiness and peace of mind that I know. And that I know I'm not tapping it to its fullest yet.
Well, we have about 5 minutes left. Is there anything that you feel you really wanted to express and share that we haven't covered yet?
Well, my overarching purpose in writing the book is for people who already have a belief in things spiritual and paranormal, to give them maybe a more firm foundation for it. But I'm especially hoping that people who have an interest in spiritual teachings or spirituality or meditation, but shy away from it because they think science has ruled out any validity to it. It's really for those people I've written this book, because what I have found is there is nothing in any of the genuine spiritual teachings, the teachings that lie at the heart of all religions, all spiritual paths, all traditions, that has been experienced directly by and testified to by the saints and sages. There's nothing that they say that isn't supported by aspects of science. It's not supported by scientific materialism. It's not supported by the people who are absolutely convinced that this material world is all there is. But if you can set them aside, if you can just sort of mentally say, okay, let me go explore the guys who aren't scientific materialists, the women who aren't scientific materialists, and see what they're saying, you'll find there the support for what the saints and sages are saying, and that there really is no line between them, no conflict between them. There is a strong foundational support for both of them in both disciplines.
Well, everyone has their own explanation for what would be the solution for all the problems of mankind. How do we get close to that utopia as possible? And science has theirs, religions have theirs, and some people might say, as soon as we have free energy, as soon as energy is free, it's not going to cost anything, then that's going to be the major step towards, a unified society and, getting rid of, lack of food and inability to, have enough for all people. I don't buy it. I think that would be very, very helpful. But I don't buy that that's the one-off solution. What about you? How do you think we get there? You've got 2 minutes left if you can fit that in there.
Well, I happen to be involved with a kind of a movement now that is quite simply putting forward the notion to everybody that you have to be the change you want to see in the world. That it starts with you, and if you don't change your consciousness, if you're not more harmonious, if you're not more thoughtful towards other people, you don't create any ripples in the pond of consciousness that affect other people. You just stay in the same level of problem thinking. So if the world is really going to make a significant change, it's going to come from individuals changing themselves first, and then with that change of consciousness, doing things differently. It may be that what they're inspired to do is to go find free energy, which would be great. But if we have the same state of consciousness we have now throughout the world, which is pretty tense, free energy could just be a disaster, right? It could be in the wrong hands and cause more problems than it solves. So
yeah, like much of science. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead.
I was just going to say much of science is the same. It's what we do with it.
Yeah. So be the change you want to be in the world. And my number one advice for people who believe that and want to do that is meditate, because that really changes you from the inside out.
Well, you know what? I can attest to that in my own small way. So Joseph, where do we get the book, and where do you want people to go to get in touch with you and to follow you, social media, etc.?
The book is available through the usual online outlets, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. You can get it from the publisher, which is New Page Books. If you want to know more about me and some of the blogs that I'm working on, you can go to my website, which is physicsandgod.com. And I have blogs coming out regularly. And there is more information about the book there and links to where you can get it.
All right, great. Author of The Physics of God, Joseph Selby, thank you so much for coming on to Paranormal Now.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's actually my pleasure indeed. I really hope that we can have you back on the program in the future. Are you planning on any other works at all in the foreseeable future?
Not too soon. This one took me 4 years to research and write. I have another idea that could take equally long, is the psychology of God.
Okay, all right.
Most of this book focuses on physics and the kind of hard sciences, where the soft sciences also have their theories that are both material and non-material. And I'd love to be able to give people an avenue, a path to seeing how psychology also supports an inner path to connecting, an inner path to transcendence.
Okay, well then, yeah, let's stay in touch to see if we can come up with an excuse to have you back on again, because I have a lot of questions that I was unable to get to you. Again, thank you for coming on to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith on the Inception Radio Network. I'd like to thank Joe Champion, MJ Lucas, and Bob Tarmac, and also Ken Cherry from Epic Voyages Radio for helping make this podcast possible. And to all of you out there, live in the mystery.